So yeah, it is really nice to be back. Thank you very much. And I am now working in Canada, in British Columbia, on the west coast, close to Vancouver, on a project put together by two organizations, a nonprofit charitable childcare organization and a for-profit social enterprise that focuses on nature and science-based activities for children. We started from two major problems, and everyone in this room, when you're studying sustainability and sustainability sciences, it can sometimes get a little daunting. There are so many variables, so many issues, and we've kind of decided that two of the major ones are children's health and development, the fact that kids just don't get outside enough these days. They are becoming further and further away from the natural processes that we so automatically want to be part of when we're children, and also the struggling local agriculture industry. And in this area, it used to be so vivid with agriculture, and you see so many for sale signs as you drive down the road, because it's very difficult to compete as a small-scale food producer when you as an individual, as a consumer, can just so easily get produce from other countries where it is cheaper to produce. So this is our project. We have altogether 25 acres, and it's pretty large. Sometimes we have parents come out and they say, I only have a yard, how are you keeping up with this? But we've got a really good team, very exciting. And we've got two major sections, and I'm gonna show you this one in particular on the left-hand side, because this is where we hold most of our outdoor classroom activities and free play and preschools and things like that. And on this side, we have three distinct ecosystems, which is really interesting from an ecological point of view. We've got a temperate area, and then a creek that runs through a riparian zone with different species growing up, the horsetail and the nettle and all sorts of difference just meters away. And then up at the top in the middle, we have a ponderosa pine grassland where cactuses, prickly pears are growing. So it's a really interesting thing to have classes come out, and we're looking at different areas in one place. This is the farm. It's really nice. And we're very conveniently situated on the top of the hill as our main center, so we can look down and see where all the kids are playing. You're following the licensing regulations by supervising all the children, but at the same time, they have quite a bit of distance. And children these days do not get a lot of time unsupervised. The ability here is that kids can go play and feel like they're alone with their friends, and they come up with so many interesting creative games, and then they can easily move on to the next part of the station. So our programs altogether hold about 400 children in 7 different locations. Our farm is the only outdoor education area, but we bring kids from all over the town to come and visit. Not only our daycares, but other daycares are welcome to come visit, and school groups as well, where teachers can call and tell us the projected learning outcomes they would like to meet for their class, and then we can find activities that meet those while the kids are playing. I had one group in particular that needed to meet the requirement for the 5 senses. So in 5 of our different stations, we had something that you could smell and guess what it was in a box, something that you could taste, and something that you could reach in and feel and guess what it is, and it's all outside. One of my main points today is the fact that everything that you do inside can be done outside, but really it's not the same way around. So far, we've had a lot of great results. I'm going to tell you a bit about our farm stations. So our buses come in the top loop, and they can park, and children are meeting in circle time in the center area, where we have a potting area for doing planting, and we have our farmhouse where we do kitchen activities, baking and jams and canning and all sorts of stuff. We've got our sand pit and our dirt pile, which are actually huge hits. Kids can play there for hours. It's really fantastic. Number 4 down here is where we have our woodwork and art area, and we have the field for running, the mini village up at the top, our circle garden, our orchard. It's a ton of space. One day, last summer, we had 68 kids in one day, and the staff that come up with them, they told me, you know, you come out here and all the problems melt away. It's really fascinating. You can have tens of thousands of dollars worth of toys in one of our centers, and when you come out here, the biggest problem that we had last year was a fight over a caterpillar. I found it first. No, I found it first, and eventually it was solved very easily because that caterpillar was a living thing and it needed to have a home. So they could work together, make the caterpillar a really nice home, and then that problem disappeared. We have all different play stations. So in our summer programs, when children come out in the morning about 9:30, they're there until about 3, and they are welcome to go play in the sand pit or the dirt pile or down our 100-foot slip and slide. It starts at the top of the hill, big piece of plastic, perforated PVC at the top, water coming down. It's a really good time. But at the same time, we'll have a staff, for instance, David here, in our gardening area. And the kids come over out of interest. Hey, what are you doing? And he says, oh, I'm planting. You can come help me if you want to. And sure enough, we get lots of volunteers. And the same thing goes for our other lessons. If I'm doing a yoga class in the morning, kids come over out of interest. What are you doing? Oh, I'm doing yoga. Grab a mat. You can join us. And so they come over and they grab a mat and they do their yoga. And it's a really neat thing to see because there's no pressure involved, but there's so much incidental learning that occurs through these processes. So in this case, they left the slip and slide, went to plant for a bit. When they were finished, they know that they have got to put their shovel back in their bucket and then they can go play again. So it's not that it's completely free with no rules or boundaries or regulations, but there's an element of respect and personal responsibility, and the kids absolutely thrive off of it. Here we've got our wood workstation where we've got one of our staff is also a college student. In the summer, he does carpentry work. So he can be there with 5 kids at a time and explain to them the importance of when you're nailing something in, you don't want to smash your fingers, so this is how you do it. So that way we get more kids who are interested in it and they can take turns, finish their project, maybe go away from it for a while, and then come back, take it off the shelf, and do it again. We also have our art station, and in the summer we have a new art project every week. So for our staff who are so creative, we are getting new and exciting things happening that the children become interested in really quickly. And if you feel like just drawing, you can take one of the clipboards or one of the boards and just go to any section of the orchard or the forest and be among the trees and just do your drawing there. We've got our orchard, and it is about 4 acres of apples. Last year we sold the majority of our apples to a winery to make cider. And the hammocks in the orchard are a great place to relax. We'd really like to get to the point where we have our nap times outside because there's so much benefit in that. And I believe Sweden already knows that, so we'll just take that and bring it to Canada. Last year, I had a group of children in the end of the summer where I was so busy. I was doing so much, and they were throwing apples at each other. And so I went over and I said, guys, you need to stop throwing the apples at each other. You're just wasting apples. You know, they take a bite, throw it on the ground, smash it. It's becoming this thing where I'm like, guys, you need to stop. Second time, I came over, guys, we talked about this. You need to stop throwing apples. It's not okay. And then the third time, I went over and I said, guys, this apple is a good apple. We could take this apple to the store and sell it and get money for the fence that we need. And then they were kind of like, okay. And then they moved on to different stations. And I mean, they're all really good kids. They just get bored sometimes. You need to kind of direct the boredom. And me, I was in a bit of a bad mood. I really want to just get my work done sometimes and kind of tell the staff, okay, if you're in this area, you need to watch this situation. But when I connected the dots for these kids and I went away, the next thing I saw was they got bikes, wagons, rope. They tied the ropes to the wagons, the bikes, and they started filling the wagons with apples, hauling them up to the house, and they created a little market. And they did their own market. They did their own signs and everything. And then when they went back to their main centers, we put it all in the van and they took their market right with them to the center. So when parents came and they sat there and they sold produce and they made $100. And I was so impressed. And one of the children eventually came up to me and said, we made this $100. And well, that's just fantastic. And I said, what do you want to do with it? And he said, oh, I want to put it toward the fence. So there's so many situations where I have just been absolutely blown away by their creativity, their ingenuity, and as soon as you give them a little bit of freedom, they will very often impress you. We also have a lot of unconventional toys, if you will. There's not much more than the dirt, the rocks, the sticks, the mud, the buckets, and the shovels, and a couple of these things in here. And it allows for children to start from scratch when they're starting a game. Like, they can turn that bucket into anything. And when you have toys in our centers, for instance, then they're colorful or they're already predetermined, then there's not too much more you can be doing with that one. These children actually played for hours at this game. In the back part of the sand pit, we've got a hose usually running, so it becomes this big, muddy, messy pit, and it is the funnest. Sometimes they get in there and they're absolutely covered. And I always tell them, you know, some people go and pay for this kind of treatment. They don't get it. They'll get it when they're older. In our farmhouse, we have all sorts of lessons. Sometimes we do pickles, and sometimes we do jam or just baking. But the children can sign up, come in, help out, and usually leave with something, in this case jam, or help out with lunch. And every day on the farm in the summer, we have a home-baked lunch where the kids can go grab their sandwich, for instance, go to the garden and get the lettuce or get a carrot or get the tomatoes, and then they can sit down in the picnic area and just have their lunch. It's really great. A lot of our kids sometimes, you know, occasionally run into a child that has trouble eating their vegetables, and we can't grow enough carrots. They just come out of the ground and they just eat them. They just dust them off and eat them. Some of the activities we have, we've got releasing the butterflies. In the springtime, we get painted lady butterflies in a little container, and the kids get to watch them grow, they climb to the top, form little letter J's, and become cocoons. At the end, we let them go, and it becomes another learning experience where we can talk about what happens to the butterflies and why they're important and what they're doing on the farm. In the summertime, we release the ladybugs. And again, that's a really exciting thing for kids because there are different age groups that approach it differently. But for our very small children, it becomes a lesson in empathy as well, because if they're to hold them, they have to hold them so carefully and make sure that they're going to be okay. And you can see that they take their time observing, practicing those observation skills and risk assessment skills too, because it's a very scary thing to have a little thing crawling on you when you're not used to it. And that's always an exciting thing. We have our nature walks every day. I guess about 11-ish, I'll ring the bell and I'll say, okay guys, I'm going on a nature walk. You're welcome to come with me if you want to. We're gonna stop and see the chickens. And sometimes I have so many kids that wanna go, we have to go in 2 trips. And we'll just take some time to go and wander and explore. An important thing for the staff in this case is to become interested in the little finds that the kids come across. Because as soon as you stop being interested, they'll kind of realize, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be interested. But if they pick something up and you think, wow, that's amazing, look at that. Oh, what can we build out of it? And it turns into a game that is child-led, but adult-supported. And then we go to our chickens. We've got meat birds, heritage birds, and layers. And the eggs are actually sold all through the farm as well. So we have a lot of trouble actually keeping up with egg demand. So kids go in and they'll take turns and be very careful to collect the eggs. And this is also a lesson in bravery for a lot of our kids, because they see the other kids go in and pick up chickens and not be afraid. But if they're afraid, it's going to take them 1 or 2 times to do it, and that is fine. You take your time. You don't have to go in there. But eventually, when they accomplish that little task that they set out to do, it's just another step, and they realize that they are able to do something. One of our activities in the summer is shelter building. And in this case, we can either find material out of the forest to build your shelter, or you can use the Lincoln log set, which is 2x4s with notches and little mallets so that the kids can actually build little houses in the village that way. And then there's also all sorts of other creative play. When a new child comes and kind of is just observing for a little while, all the other kids play, and they'll kind of go, in some cases, I'm bored, you know? And then I say, well, you know, I'm gonna go and shovel this rock pile over here. Do you wanna help me do that? And they go, okay. And as they're doing it, they kind of realize that it looks like there's something more fun over there, and they think, well, you know, I'm gonna go play with the mud. And I say, okay, just put your shovel away. And then they come up with these new inventions and new games, and they look like a lot of fun. There's also lots of little fines, and sometimes we have some children who have a tendency to not get dirty right away, but usually, on average, it takes 2 weeks for all our children to just deprogram and realize it's okay to get dirty because you can get clean again. In this case, I had a little girl who, she was watching us work, and eventually I said, would you like to help? And she said, yeah, and she just climbed on the back, and she grabbed a shovel, and she just went for it. And one thing I learned while I was here is that there's really no bad weather, just bad clothing. So we always make sure our children are bundled up, and just in case they come with their group and they are not bundled up, we have a whole bunch of these one-piece yellow splash suits, Muddy Buddies, and we've got 40 of them. So we've got them for our daycares, kindergartens, grade 1s, all the way up to our grade 2s, which is very convenient for us. And even on rainy days, you can still have a lot of fun. So results, the actual results of this whole program. When children are outside and being stimulated by not only what they're looking at and they're interested in, but also their smells and their sounds and there's things that are new to see. And when they're going through that early brain development, that neural pruning, and their brain starts to cut off blood flow to certain places that they're just not using, to be inside is almost limiting. So we found that we knew this program was important off the bat. We were a little concerned that the children wouldn't be so interested in it first, but by the time it got going, they were so interested in it. We are having way too many people sign up, so we're actually booking for next year for our classes. Right here we found a wasp nest that had fallen and dead, unfortunately, for the wasps, but not for us. And I started to pick it apart and show the kids what was inside this little wasp nest. And eventually they were brave enough to do it themselves, and we pulled all the wasps out, and we had like a full life cycle of this wasp. So we kept that on our what we found today table, which is always covered in sometimes the very strangest finds. And another element of this whole program is risk in play. So often in our developed countries, we take away the risk. We take away the ability to climb trees. You know, it's too slippery, don't touch that. Okay, put that down, that could be dirty, go wash your hands, all the time. And in this case, we kind of step back and let them take that big leap. Sometimes they fall, and sometimes they hurt themselves, and you pick them up and you dust them off and you say it's gonna be okay, and when they hurt themselves, they realize that they can heal, which is a key lesson in life. And not only are they having fun, they're actually learning about physics and natural sciences and all sorts of different elements in the natural world. Another element that's really important is the stand and stare time, because so often we fill all their time with activities, and they need to have time to process and sit and think and come up with their own ideas and their ability to self-regulate and even think about what's going on inside them in terms of how they're feeling. And there's never any shortage of anything to see. All sorts of bugs, all sorts of plants, and it fuels different types of play that we don't see inside so much. We see a little bit more of this inter-age and intergender play and positive role play. And when in the little houses, it won't just be all the girls in the houses, it'll be the boys too, and they'll have to bring the buckets and they'll say, well, this is what I found, and they'll go get some raspberries and they'll mush it into a pie, and it'll become this really intricate game that goes all day long. We had one little boy last year who got so dirty that his pants wouldn't even stay up. There was just so much mud on them. So this year we actually have a very interesting partnership with UBCO's first-year engineering students. So they help us they're helping us design a solar-powered hand washing and shower station with biodegradable soap, so the kids can get completely rinsed off outside. The extra water can go into the flowers, and then I won't have to tell kids to stop going inside with their muddy pants. And it's learning for everyone, because when I first started this, I also had a tendency to be a little bit scared of bugs. Go figure. So I found this giant beetle. It has a fuzzy tummy and it has these hook legs, and it was dead. It was on the side of the road, obviously hit by a car. And I picked it up on a leaf, and I was walking toward the group, and I was picking away the leaf until I could have it in my hand, but I really didn't want them to see my reaction, because so often children are very moldable by what the adult that they trust, their reaction. So eventually I could hold this bug, and I went over and I said, "Hey guys, guess what I have?" And some kids are like, "You don't have anything." And I said, "Okay, watch." And so I show them this bug. Some of them run away, some of them were like, "Oh, gross, look at this bug." And one little boy, eventually he comes to me and he says, "I really want to hold it, but I'm scared." And I said, "Okay, give me your hand." So I held it and I said, "I'm just gonna touch you with it, okay?" And he says, "Okay." And I'm like, "There, you held it. That wasn't so bad." And then eventually a little bit longer, and eventually a little longer, and eventually I could let it go. And then he could hold this bug. And then we had this little kindergarten with this giant bug, and he was going around and just showing everybody and just blowing them away with this giant scary bug that he had in his hands. Then I had that same group of children next week, and they were catching other bugs. And then we started discussing what kind of bugs they were, and which bugs are good for what, and which bugs could bite you, and which ones look like they could bite you, but they're not going to bite you. Children so often retain all this information very easily as well. I have kids that you can talk to, Pokemon cards, and they know every single Pokemon and all their stages and the different PowerPoints that they have. And when I was a kid, it was only 150 Pokemon, but it's a whole lot more now, and they know it. So when I have these kids out and they find an insect that they found even last year, they'll remember the name, and they'll remember what it's going to eat, and they remember what it's good for in the environment, and all sorts of interesting facts. Sometimes they'll learn something else through a parent or through a teacher, and then they'll come back and tell me something about it, and I'm learning too. Another story I'd like to share with you is every morning when I go around the farm and do the security check, I'm always looking for things that might be hazardous. One morning I found a dead hawk, and my immediate reaction as a caregiver is to get rid of the hawk, just shovel it over the fence. And I realized that, when you're a kid and you find stuff like that, that's just so fascinating. So I left it there, and I kind of let them find it by themselves. And it set off a whole chain of events. First you find it, and it's really, ooh, gross, what is that? And then they go and they find sticks and they start poking at it. And then I'm kind of standing on the background, and they're kind of poking at it, and then one of them decides that, it needs to be buried. And so they start to grab shovels and they start to dig. And some children are told to go get flowers, and some children are told to go get rocks, and they just organize themselves. And then when it was finally buried and finished, they stood around and had a little eulogy. And one little boy said, "Dear hawk, thank you for keeping the mice out of our houses. And thank you for keeping the mice out of our houses. Goodbye." And then they all solemnly walked away, and they found other things to do. But for weeks, every time I saw those kids at our other centers, they'd be like, "Oh, is the hawk still there?" And they named it, I think they named it Falcon, actually. It was a really interesting event. And we found the same thing again next year when we found a dead snake, and the whole situation happened again. It's interest and amazement and fear, and then kind of sadness and a little bit of empathy, and then slowly but surely they kind of go through these processes, and then they talk about it. It's a neat thing. I'd like to talk to you about partnerships that we have with the community. So we've been really lucky to have a couple partnerships with the UBCO, one of which was their ethnobotany students had started to identify all the different plants in our area and put the information together in a easy to read card information kit. So the kids can see the picture on one side and flip it over and have information on the back of what it's good for or what Native American groups would use it for. And a lot of times we just pick these out of the garden and throw them. And some of them have so much value. There's one called purslane, if I recall, and it has more omega-3 fatty acids than like a same amount, a drop of fish oil. And that's something I just toss all the time. And we have a wild amaranth seed, and we have burdock root, which is fantastic for teas, especially for like, it's got anti-inflammatory properties and all sorts of interesting things. So that project has brought in an element of traditional ecological knowledge to not only our kids, but also our staff, and then parents as well when they come to visit, because that's just not something we use a lot in our society anymore. It also allows for a platform for talking about safety, you know. When we look at mushrooms, for instance, we talk about, you know, some mushrooms look really similar to ones that you can eat, but you gotta be so careful. Never eat a mushroom because you just don't know. Some, you know, all mushrooms are edible, but some only once. So overall, this project has kind of become not only a level playing field for all of our kids. So we have kids that come out, you know, they've got special needs or they've got different abilities, and they end up playing with children that they normally don't play with inside, because they have all sorts of different activities to spark their interest and allow them to do things that otherwise they wouldn't be doing. For instance, our music garden, we're in the process of building that. It's a large outdoor musical instruments in long, windy pathways of butterfly garden. And it's specifically beneficial for our children with autism, because if they come out and they start doing this activity with other children, and then when they feel like they're ready to kind of back off and kind of stand behind the tall grass or something, feel safe and away, and come out when they're ready again, it takes the pressure away from being part of the group, and they can still kind of observe. It's a really neat thing that we've started up so far. We also have somewhat started to support the farming aspect, because with our 400 kids enrolled in the Clubhouse alone and the other groups that come out, we can't keep up with a lot of production when parents want to buy stuff because it's part of the daycare. So we see support for children and we see support for the farming community at the same time. And I've also had a lot of luck with grants. There are a couple people in our area, like TELUS, that is, I guess, the Canadian equivalent of Tele2, and they've donated us about $10,000 to go toward our provincial park level nature walk into our forested area. And we've also been greatly supported by a couple other, there's a bank, Interior Savings, that's helped us out. United Way comes out, brings people for volunteering, which is really fantastic because sometimes you just can't keep up with the work. And we've also had a lot of interest from researchers, not just from local ones like UBCO, where we have one in particular who studies the risk analysis in children's play and how it affects them later in life in terms of not only their lifestyle, their decisions and their lifestyle choices, but also a group of Japanese researchers that had come out in the beginning of May, and they run nature preschools in Japan, and they wanted to see how we run our programs and how it's different to theirs, and they suggested we be sister preschools. So that's also an exciting new project. So yeah, thank you very much for listening to my talk, and do you have any questions?